dear speakers, dear participants. We are proud to open this conference within our project Learn How to Be Well Informed. It is being implemented under the sponsorship of NATO Public Diplomacy Division, and it is a product of a joint cooperation of our two associations, Atlantic Council of Croatia and Women for Cyber in North Macedonia. The topic of this conference is NATO 2030 and fight against the disinformation. It was our goal to increase the awareness of the importance of recognizing disinformation with this project, especially among young people. Ljubica, if you want to continue.
Thank you, Monica. Once again, hello everyone, and thanks for being here with us today. Without you, we won't have a quality event, as we think that we'll having in mind our speakers and of course our participants. It is my pleasure to welcome you, both our speakers and participants today, and I'm eager to hear your insight on this information, then how it is easiest spread among the public, how to counter it, and what is the influence of emotions to accepting and spreading this information, and especially in what ways it represents a security threat. Since it's actually for the first time for me to be a kind of host and partner in organizing project. When I say we, I mean Women for Cyber North Macedonia chapter. It is my pleasure in the name of North Macedonia chapter to introduce you in our work and to follow our work through the social media network. So this is the first opportunity, and I hope we'll have other opportunities to cooperate with the Atlantic Council of Croatia and Monica as well. It's a very challenging and interesting topic. There is a lot of aspects to discuss about, but we will start with our first speaker, Ms. Mark Leahy, which I have a privilege to hear in few occasions. And the right words when I used to say for him when I'm asked about his presentation is that he is a real storyteller in the most positive way. He is one of the best storytellers I've ever heard. So for those who still don't know who our distinguished speaker, Mr. Mark Leahy is, I would say very briefly that he is Director of Communications Division of SHAPE NATO. And in the next minutes, he will share his interesting thoughts and stories about disinformation, tactics, and story behind it. Thanks, Mark. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. I've been asked to look at the spread of disinformation, narratives behind it, and countering disinformation, and what NATO's role is, though I'm sure Vlasta will cover that as well. But what I want to start off with is just how important it is. And maybe I can quote Barack Obama, who regards the malevolent information architecture we now face as the single biggest threat to our democracy, which I completely agree with. What he says is, if we do not have the capacity to distinguish what's true from what's false, then by definition, the marketplace of ideas doesn't work, and by definition, our democracy doesn't work. He concludes, we are entering into an epistemological crisis. Epistemological, it's a really big word. I had to look it up to make sure I understood it, although I thought I did, and fortunately I was right. It's derived from the Greek, and what it means, it's a principled system of understanding. To know, to understand, and to be acquainted with. And it is the basis of Western civilization, of Western debate, of how we do our business. And he and others consider that that is in conflict with what in Greek terms is what's called doxa, which is basically common belief or popular opinion. So on one side, you have accepted fact, a common basis to discuss things. And on the other side, you have received opinion, what I think. And I'm going to be very blunt. If you look around the world, in the United States, in my country, what you can see is a polarization of opinions and viewpoints in which people say, because I believe this, it is so. And the fact that you think it's a fact, screw your facts. And if there is no common basis of fact, if we can't agree on certain things from which we derive debate, then democracy doesn't work, because we all end up polarized. And some people say an election was fair, and some people say it wasn't. And the facts of the matter become irrelevant because your opinion matters more. And this is inherently a potential crisis of democracy. The basis by which we all work, the basis by which NATO works as an alliance of democratic nations. So when we talk about disinformation and misinformation, we should understand it to be an attack on the basis of common debate and the way that our systems work. If disinformation and misinformation become dominant, then an undemocratic populism will take place. Emotions will take place. So in this discussion, I want everyone to look at it in those terms of importance. This is not just about making sure people understand what we think. It is about oiling the wheels of a functioning democracy. It's that important. And of course, there are people out there who don't want to oil the wheels of democracy. There's authoritarian nations out there who want to undermine it. There's authoritarian people out there who want to undermine it. There is populists who just want you to get all emotional. And one of the primary things that's happened is the impact of social media. I'm of an age, I'm very close to retirement, which predates social media. And once upon a time, if you had a strange or outlandish view, if you believed that the moon landing was fake, or that the world was ruled by lizards in disguise, you were considered to be stupid. You had no audience, you had no platform. Social media means that any view, no matter how outlandish, will find a platform, will be validated. It may only be 1,000 people, but that's 1,000 people you can talk with every day. And it leads us to things like QAnon, where a significant number of Americans, one of the most educated countries in the world, when I say significant number, I'm talking about 20–30% of the electorate, believe that America is run by a bunch of deep state pedophiles, including Bill Gates and George Soros, all against Donald Trump. Now think about that. How in God's name does 30% of America think that QAnon has got something in it? So misinformation and disinformation is incredibly powerful. And it is spread by many, many actors. It's not just nations, it is pressure groups. And social media itself is increasingly sophisticated to the point where deepfakes will become harder and harder to distinguish. That you will, if you were so minded, in a year's time, you would easily be able to take me and put in my mouth a strong argument for QAnon. And it would be very hard to say that I wasn't making those arguments. So we're in a very perilous time. the narratives behind disinformation are incredibly various. And so when you're analyzing this phenomenon, you need to source it. So for instance, if we take the Russians, who are very big into disinformation, they are primarily disruptors. Their main aim is to create confusion. They're not trying to make us say Russia is wonderful. They're trying to make us say our governments are rubbish and argue with each other. So when you can source that, then you can start working out the narrative. The Chinese narrative is one of trying to project themselves as a nation which you cannot stand in the way of because they are too powerful. And also to try and pretend that things like the Belt and Road Initiative are broad and to the benefit of all. So you can identify their narratives. And then you have anti-vaccination narratives. So when you talk about the narratives behind the disinformation, this is where you have to come to one of the first things you need to look at, which is analyzing where things are coming from, breaking them down. And so the narrative analysis, sourcing disinformation, sourcing misinformation is incredibly important. Okay, you have now recognized your narrative, you have now sourced your thing. How do you counter it? One of the things that narratives and disinformation can do is they can always outweigh you. So if you have a story which is false, it will take you a long time to disprove it. Far more time than it would take them to come up with 10 other false stories. So while I will not knock the idea of analyzing misinformation and disinformation and coming up with a coherent counter to specific allegations that this is false news, do not believe that knocking down somebody else's fake news is going to change them and will work, because what will happen is they will just come up with 10 other stories. And this is one of the things the Russians do. And of course, if you spend all your time trying to knock down a false story, you're actually operating within the area of the adversary. You're now dancing to their tune. However hard you work, they have the initiative. So to counter disinformation, you need a very clear narrative of your own. You need credibility of your own. You need to project an image of your own. And these have to be done through having coherent policy, coherent narrative, and credibility. Why should anyone listen to you? And to have credibility, your actions must live up to your words. So let us be very blunt here. A lot of Western nations have lost a lot of credibility. Many of them lost credibility because of the weapons of mass destruction fiasco in Iraq. Many lost credibility because of the disillusionment caused by the economic crash of 2008. Many have lost credibility because they are caught out in lies. So credibility is key, because once you lose credibility, it's very hard to get back. But you must counter a narrative with a narrative. Why are you trying to do what you're doing? And you need very good individuals to answer it. You need credible individuals to answer it. Finally then, before I I will end with just the role of NATO, but I think the role of NATO will be covered a little bit by Vlasta, but it's also less important than your role. What are you doing? Are you an intelligent customer? What are you reading? What are you watching? Are you checking where you're getting your information from? Because I'm sure that we all, pardon me, we all have our own prejudices. We all want to believe what we want to believe. So the first weapon to counter disinformation is ourselves. When you read something, what source? You check it. When something seems too good to be true, it will be. When you see information, where does it come from? Never believe anything you cannot source. When you see something you like, ask yourself, am I liking it because it tells me what I want to hear or because it's right? So be the intelligent customer. You, as individuals, are the best defense against disinformation and misinformation. And I think that's a good point for me to stop on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leite, for this very good insight into how to actually start to tackle the disinformation and to start from ourselves. It's a great, when you started with saying that, I mean, Obama's quote about our democracy, that it depends on the level of our of information our society faces. So that's a great introduction into all of this conference today. And I wouldn't go further because I wrote so many good thoughts, but I would like to announce our next speaker, Ms. Vlasta Zekulic. Vlasta is a great expert in international relations, looking from the perspective of security challenges, and as an officer of Croatian Armed Forces, Vlasta joined NATO and is in plans and operational preparedness at Operations Division at NATO headquarters. And besides the military career, Vlasta also pursues academic career. And Vlasta, your presentation will be more about hybrid warfare and how disinformation and misinformation together with negative emotions can be used for this hybrid warfare. So Vlasta, the floor or the screen is yours.
Thank you, Monica. I really appreciate that. So it's very interesting that Mark started quoting Obama. I will actually start my part with quoting President Trump. During his election, first elections in 2016, he used the quote more than once and said, "The real power is fear." So how do you make people afraid, and why fear? We haven't really seen that so much prior to it, but in the eve of those first US elections in 2016 and Brexit, the fear became like this marketable feeling that was pushed. That was pushed across so many different domains and environments. So why fear? And we spend a lot of time here in NATO headquarters, and I work, although I'm in the operations division, I'm heavily supporting the hybrid team in our emergency security challenges division. And one thing that we've looked at is basically analyzed what were the most common hybrid attacks in the last 3 years. Basically, what is being attacked? What do we have to protect as we look at this? And interestingly, there was the 6 big themes that was constantly attacked with very, very different tools. But one was the elections. Second was cohesion and credibility. Third was freedom of decision making. Fourth was perception, belief, societal cohesion. Fifth was freedom of military operations. And the last one was the critical infrastructure. So what actually this told us when we mapped it across all of the hybrid actors, and I fully agree with Mark, this is not just about Russia. It was solely about Russia, but it's not. Obviously, there is like a lot of actors, state, non-state, private companies who are now fully able to do this. Because what does it give it? It gives them ability, and this is what all the hybrid actors do. Affect will, that's first thing. They're affecting your decision-making calculus. And of course, when you make those decisions, whether it's for the elections, whether it's in what do you buy or don't buy, who do you trust, who you don't trust, it's very, very important. How do you make decisions? So impacting that decision making is the goal number one of any hybrid actor on any hybrid action. Number two, it's manipulate strategic choices. It's forcing people to think that they have a choice or they don't. If you put them in a corner where they believe they do not have a choice, the choices that they will make as a consequence of it are far more radical and drastic and cause polarization that Mark was talking about. And last but not least, it's shape perceptions. Mark is again already mentioned, opinions matter, perceptions matter. And how do you shape these perceptions from the early on, and at which level to actually become your own opinion? One thing that was became quite clear during the Cambridge Analytica scandal is that when private company took a military concept of psychological warfare, and in the military, we all know psychological operations are not allowed to be done on your own troops. This is a non-kinetic tool of war. You create the effect on your enemy by doing this. Suddenly this company takes military concepts, apply it to like basically electoral populations. Everybody knows that in elections, you need two things: persuasion of your message, and then the turnout, how many people you actually get out. So this company use this model that, again, we consider it a tool of war to apply to the electoral population to sway their decisions. What they missed, what they needed was data. And the data nowadays, and this is what makes hybrid warfare so much more dangerous nowadays, although the concept is very, very old, is that we actually give a lot of data about ourselves. What we think, what we feel, what we want, what we fear is out there. Somebody who actually has an access about this information from us is able to sway our opinions. One of the models that they like to use is this 5-factor model of personality, because if they understand, if they're able to group you, each one of us, which personality group we fall in, they can message us, they can create the Google context, they can create the news contents. So when we look from the NATO perspective, totality of the landscape, we kind of like mostly look in like, how do we protect what is vital for us? And out of all these things that were attacked, cohesion and credibility of us as the alliance becomes one of the main ones. So how do we do this? Probably all of you know we created a strategy on NATO's role in countering hybrid warfare 5 years ago. However, already the name tells you NATO has only a role to play. We are not the main actors. Mark is absolutely right. We're just a part of the game. And maybe we can get a more clear picture, and we're able to dismantle the hybrid campaigns a little bit faster than the nations individually, because we can see the totality of the landscape. But how do we respond? How do we get the targeted nation to respond? To admit we have a vulnerability that's being exploited over and over again. I'll take example of one of our allies, like Lithuania, has been hit 7 times this year with the information operations fueled by the cyber attack. 7 times. They're constantly under attack. And while we're able to dismantle the campaign that is being launched, it is just going to be rehashed and hit again and hit again and hit again. And like Mark said, ability of the state to respond will be futile if the people in that country itself are not able to differentiate between the two. I'm married to an American, so unfortunately I have a huge access to American media and the disinformation that's being fueled over there. And ability, like just Mark said, like mentioned, I have to support that. It's unimaginable how hard certain actors in that country are trying to dismantle any common sense by saying, and this is, like I said, not only Russia, although Russia is very good at doing it, but when you say like, everything you hear is a lie, don't even trust me, go somewhere else. But of course, you're trusting a person who is telling you everybody's potentially lying. And this is kind of like, swaying them. Like, why would I tell you to check if you think like I'm lying to you? But the point is, by saying like that, every legitimate source becomes illegitimate. Every scientific institution, every research facility, every like academic institution, every governmental, every intergovernmental, everybody's lying. So the source of information becomes people who have zero credibility to do this, but they're the only ones being trusted by the huge swaths of population. So this is this youth, and exactly like Ljubica said, is actually the group of people that are so, I won't say easily convinced of others, but because they have the minds that are willing to look for, well, this doesn't sound like, well, what does they say? What does it say? And a lot of this stuff is actually quite logical if you are not well educated. I'll give you just one blunt example. Like my father-in-law, who is like very successful businessman and stock trader and stuff, sent me this video, and he said, like, Vlasta, I think you should look at this. Like, I believe your opinion. And it was about socialism and how the socialism is going to run over America. And the whole video was like really great production. Mark, you would love it, you know, but the quality of production was superb, but it was basically showing Lenin and like 1920s and like the killing of the Russian royal family. And I'm like, how can any American in 2020 believe that, you know, suddenly socialists will come and kill all the rich people in America? But it was such a huge campaign in this specific like layers of American society that, you know, they actually believed it, which again, like mind-blowing, but it's true, it's happening. So in more closer to home, for example, when I look at our region where we come from, if you look at the Sputnik Serbia, you know, and the impact that it has since it launched in 2014, the way it's changed, also like to this, like, let's say the left of the bank perceptions and the mindset, who is good guys, who are bad guys, who is here to support us and who is there against us, constantly showing how futile and ineffective NATO and EU are in solving the Balkan problem, and how the only people they can possibly rely is actually Russia and China. They basically keep on telling you, you don't have a choice. We are the only one. We are the only good guys here. And it actually grew from 43% to 68% approval ratings of these policies. And the only thing that was actually happened in that time that we can link it to is actually Sputnik, you know, and their launch of programs in our languages throughout the media space for free, obviously. And it has a huge impact. So what can we do more about it? Obviously, NATO has a good tools. We can help dismantle disinformation campaigns. We can send counter-hybrid support teams to help understand the nature of where the attacks are coming from, both on the technical side, conceptual, all the policy stuff. We can do strategic analysis with the partners and the allies there. We can help increase societal resilience and organize a lot of education. But I will again support Mark fully in saying it's all about each one of us. What I usually tell when I teach my students is that if you hear something and it makes you tick, if it makes you feel very happy, very sad, very angry, particularly angry, or afraid, think twice. Check 3 times. Check every source you can. Go left, go right. Go check the other country sources. Check different language sources. But like if it's making you feel, if it's triggering emotions, and emotions are very, very strong, particularly if they're anger or distrust or fear, these emotions are probably triggered on purpose for you to change your mind, affect your will, impact your strategic calculus, and affect your perceptions. And that's why, again, I could not support more than what Mark said, but like each one of us need to be aware of the way that the news, information, each way it's being served to us, it's making us feel and making us tick. That's the first and the most important indicator that it's hybrid or information or whatever adversarial campaign is actually making its mark. So I'll stop here and obviously be more than happy to answer any questions if we have at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Vlasta. It was very nice to hear some other aspects of disinformation, for instance, introducing choices, perceptions. because at the end of the day, we are all, when we come home and use our media channels, we are all individuals. So that's why it's important to see the things also from that point of view. And I like that you mentioned and introduct in our discussion also non-state actors, as well as state actors, and also the role of NATO, but putting in a dimension that NATO is only one chain, only one part of the circle, one of the factors when it comes to disinformation. And this is a kind of natural flow with what we are going to discuss with our next speaker. I'm very happy and delighted to have and to represent once again one of my dearest colleagues and friends, I would say, Professor Metodi Hadjianev, which is going to talk a bit about security aspects of disinformation and touching also threats coming from state and non-state actors. Only few introductory words for those who don't know Professor Metodi Hadjianev. He's associate professor, adjunct faculty member, also at many, I won't mention all of them, universities, faculties. So Professor Metodi, I'm very happy to have you here with us.
Okay, thank you very much for having me here. I could not say anything else than just salute the initiative you have launched here, because I think we are at a very critical time in discussing disinformation, misinformation, especially targeting youth here. Many people still in the region coming from Southeastern Europe or the Western Balkan basically tend to think in blocks and believe that this is about policy, and maybe this is something that we should focus on politicians. Well, our politicians are very illiterate, I must say. We also must admit that illiteracy is a main problem here, and we need to invest there. I would like to tackle the security aspects of this, because as previous speakers have touched upon it, much of this disinformation has not just the economic aspects, not just the social impacts or emotional impacts, but also security impacts. And lately, in last maybe decade, some actors, both state and non-state actors, have found a way to weaponize the information and social media up. I would also now introduce a quote, because everybody started with a quote, so I had to come up with some quote. And this is the Rule 18 from Sun Tzu, who famously wrote that all warfare is actually based on deception. So how basically it works, I will try to explain how it works and why social media and information communication technologies and internet, something that has been made or been used and launched as promising for democracy, spread of freedom, spread of innovation, etc., become also a problem, or a channel that streaming several threat vectors, some of which are basically coming from ability to disinform us, misinform us, or malinform us. Well, the ongoing digital transformation and information and communication technologies expansion has converged both worlds, that is the physical world that we used to live, and the cyber world, if I could say, the digital world. Those convergence, however, are not without a cost. Though interconnection and interdependence is great, though it basically provides an opportunity and expands horizons, this conversion basically has some impacts, because the effects in the cyber world are produced by the end users, and they have a horizontal that basically impacts the vertical system that we tend to live on. And this creates a lot of problems, because some actors, non-state and state actors, have tried to abuse and corrupt some of the let's say concepts that haven't been designed for weapon, for war, or that haven't been designed for geostrategic achievements, but for other purposes. And they are trying now to use them in that context, which basically creates problem when you have to respond with regulations, with procedures that are designed to actually address and match different problems. So state and non-state actors are exploiting these challenges for political purposes, and this is why they are able to accelerate threats that are evolving. So from asymmetric threats through cyber and hybrid-based threats, now we have operators or military thinkers who speak the hyper threats, basically threats that will actually fuse all the things at once, will accelerate everything with empowering or building on the digital tools that we tend to see them as a positive and which basically are positive. So why this power and why the power of this information is that strong and why it actually have such effects? Well, information and communication technologies, as was introduced in social media applications, were basically seen as an opportunity. They were provided as positive aspects, but lately they became disruptive channels. From a tool of individual empowerment, they became weaponized, and both state and non-state actors realized that they can use those constructs that were made, let's say, for different purposes, let's say for profit, to mobilize more people, etc. They saw these platforms and weaponize them so that they can reach now more the audience by manipulating the information. At the same time, they also are trying to inject ideology and project this ideology while questioning the opponent's ideology. Like Russians, for example, when they are talking also about the misinformation and propaganda, they are saying that this is a West creation. And many people here in the Balkans, when you ask them, okay, what do you think is fake news? Well, they say, well, CNN is a fake news. And they all address CNN because they try to rationalize their approach in their perspectives, in their ways of thinking and how they see things. So for the Russians, let's say the West created the environment for modern information warfare by inventing social media platforms, which facilitated revolutions and protests around the world. While West see Russia that started this online information warfare against its neighbors Georgia and Estonia back in the days, and in particular in Ukraine. So there are also evidence that KGB has purposefully designed this type of activities just to attack Western societies. So it is true that today this information has become a threat to democracy, lies in its capacity to influence public opinion on the basis of falsehood. As it was already introduced, now we tend to believe that everything we are reading is fake, or we tend to question everything. Maybe to a certain degree that has a point and that might be a good thing, but it actually requires a fundamental change that we need to be prepared to do. Why the youth are so vulnerable is another question that we need to ask ourselves. Well, for first, young people tend to be more adaptive to new technologies. They tend to live with them, and they pretty much customize their behavior to it. For them, social media applications and internet is just an online extension of their offline life. They are easy to adopt to create a virtual world. And for them, also the anonymity and opportunity for the new beginning, which by some authors and some psychologists was seen as a positive aspect in order to basically mobilize some marginalized individuals, is an opportunity. These provide for social activism, but the problem with this is that, as I introduced in the beginning, this is a horizontal world depending on end user. It's not created by government policy, but by end user. So its content, it contents basically depends on the end users. They can create the content. So with this digitalization and the fast, let's say, evolution in this convergence between cyber and physical world, Now the families and the government who were assumed authorities, now they don't create content, but someone else is creating content for our children and for our youth. The problem with this is that basically, unlike the, let's say, middle-aged persons that is hard to convince them on some activism, youth is prone to activism, and it's easily to fuel them or inject them with idea and with energy that might be basically misleading and that will live in different direction. This is a result. So from a left-wing, let's say, type of terrorism and extremism, now we are facing, and what Europe and the West is facing, and here in the Balkans, we are facing the rise of the right-wing extremism, thanks to the, just this type of activities. The problem is even more, let's say, complex because it also confuses strategic thinkers and operators. And I'll give you an example. When former US Secretary Mattis visit our country, and I was still working for the president at that time, when we met him, he came to the president, then became a public news afterwards, cited by several journals, including New York Times, Associated Press, etc., that he has a credible, he basically claimed that he had a credible information that Russians are influencing to North Macedonian internal affairs. All of a sudden, the prime minister, basically, who is identified as a pro-Western, definitely, and he was actually seen as one of the problem solver and very responsible for our accession to NATO, came immediately, maybe 30 minutes after, he said, I don't have that information. Basically, I don't have a proof for Russian influence in the country. This is not to protect the Russians, but this is basically a result of the conventional approach to the problem and understanding, trying to see things vertically and trying to see things in the conventional way, defining threat or risk assessment threats. So why it is a problem? Because people that are using this and weaponizing this and using them in political purposes are corrupting the existing concepts. And they create misinformation, which are false information, disseminating without harmful intent. They also create disinformation, created and shared by people with harmful intent, and malinformation, the sharing of a genuine information with the intent to cause harm. So how and what are the ways, because everybody provided some view about potential solution. My views are toward that direction. I would say that disconnecting the youth from ICT and social media is not an option because we need to keep the positive aspects of these new gadgets and try to materialize them in a positive way. Overprotection, on the other hand, is again not an option, though many Western governments have introduced policies and regulations that basically are toward that direction. But there are authors who analyze this as a problem, claiming that basically now Western democracies in some sort of regulation act like authoritarian regimes, and there are researchers out there that actually have claimed that there is not much of a difference between Western regulation and let's say Russia type of regulations. I'm not arguing about the quality of these researchers. I'm just saying that there are researchers that are looking this from that perspectives. At the same time, the Alliance Colonel's, let's say, defensive posture is designed to fit the conventional threats functioning largely on a episodic mode, which is switched on and switched off through a series of political and military decision points in accordance with the pre-existing plans. In an era of persistent competition that futures constant short or non-noticed threats that are basically below the threshold and basically that are exploiting social vulnerabilities. Something that we need to invest is, and I think that NATO has rightfully recognized this in its new strategic concept, is to build a layered resilience. That is a resilience that will converge and mobilize building capacities across the society. That means that we need to invest in our youth in building this resilience, and one way in building this resilient societies to disinformation is to improve the media and information literacy. UNESCO has come up with this concept. This concept has been supported by European Union, and I believe it is it provides a good platform that later states can utilize and adopt, but at least focus on a way that they can build youth capacity to understand the challenges that they might face by using information communication technologies, Internet of Things, and social media applications, while preserving the positive aspects. I'm not saying that it's going to be an easy job, and I was also impressed by some of the recommendations that came out by different projects, providing, let's say, protocols, what to do, how to do. But I later decided that I would be basically careful with this, because if we tend to say, okay, this is a solution, this is a default that you can use, that might be working for some time, but then the peer enemies, the peer competitors might come up with something that can trick that. Instead, we should focus on building the, I know it's a painful process and a long one, and instead I believe that we should focus in building this process, and in this we should involve the school and education systems and build their capacities and introduce this as a in our educational system if we are about to basically achieve that level of resilience. I'll stop here, and because I think, yes, I am on time, so I open the floor for questions and be happy to answer any, if there are any.
Thank you very much, Professor Hadjianev, for reminding us how important it is to invest in education, to fight illiteracy, because our youth is especially vulnerable under, I would say, attack of these new technologies. And of course, it's a very good point of reminding us of Rule 18 of Sun Tzu, and that its deception is a base for the warfare, actually. We were reminded here, and thank you all to our speakers very much for these interesting presentations, and I see already raised hands. I can see that it will be a very good discussion, and for reminding us how disinformation can have severe consequences. It can lead people to ignore, for example, if we now point to this pandemic, to ignore this official health advice, engage in some risky behavior, even have negative impacts, what you were also mentioning, on our democratic institutions and societies. And of course, that is also economic and financial institution as a consequence. So, Professor Ecai, I see your hand. If you can unmute yourself and please ask questions.
Thank you very much. Hello from Pristina. Thank you to the speakers for your well-informed speeches, and also to Monica and Jubica for organizing this event, and also you have been very active recently. I was trying to follow on your activities, and congratulations on that. I think this topic is very important, and it pertains to the whole Balkans region, because the Balkans region, I think, is one of the most vulnerable parts of Europe that is falling prey to disinformation campaigns because of, let's say, foreign influence and trying to control the region through use of different means and methods. I think nobody mentioned here the late European Parliament report that was just recently published on the disinformation that also focuses on the Western Balkans.
So do you have some question, or I saw Ms. Miowska also that she raised her hand. I don't know if she wants to have a question, or you have.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. It was an honor and a pleasure to listen to the speakers. I'm a Master of Science in Security. I work in the Institute of Security and Defense and the European University. My mentor is Professor Oliver Bakreski, and we had a joint research for the abuse of the cyberspace in the election process. So my concrete question was how much securitized, how high on the agenda is this issue, and since it's a complex issue combined with several aspects, what's the best way to tackle this comprehensive threat, which stems from, let's see, the journalist sphere, along with some official media outlets, combined with some security aspects, as a conclusion, what's the best practice to stop it, rather than fight it, as the first speaker said, because the more you try to prevent it, the more it
okay, yeah.
out.
Yes, I think so. I don't know. Do you want someone to answer, or do you pose a question to all three speakers, or maybe Professor Zekulic, Dr. Zekulic?
Yes, whoever is willing to provide an answer will be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, so very quickly, so we have looked into use of all these like tools against the elections, and there are basically three broad themes, let's put it like that, how the elections can be affected. One is through pushing preferential candidates, usually through like funding, depending how the nations have it arranged. Basically, you push the candidate who is promoting your own messages, and you feed them with information about the adversarial candidates, you fuel them, you promote them, you get them into the media space and stuff. So that is the one way of doing it. Second part of doing it is through the different NGOs and proxies. Basically, you're making sure that whoever you are or adversarial candidate is against basically get smeared campaigns, cyber attack, their personal data is revealed in the way that the others are not. Basically, you target the opposition candidates with a full range of hybrid and cyber tools. Like Mark mentioned in his remarks, a lot of times, like somebody is attacking you, he or she's done this and that. You're saying like, no, I didn't, but it's not enough. And usually it's much harder to prove that you didn't do something than for the person or an actor making a claim. So basically this discrediting the credible sources or credible candidates is a second tool. And third, and not least in any way, is actually using the cyber tools to corrupt the voting systems, or at least to corrupt the trust in the voting systems. We know that more and more nations across the European Union are using electronic voting. So basically by cyber attacking, even on a small scale, but creating this doubt in the people. And again, we just saw it maybe in states as well, during the elections, you doubt that seed that the process has not been legitimate and it's not right. And like I said, these three things, whether you support the one that you really like, whether you attack the ones that you want to disrupt it, or you attack the process itself, by doing this is the three tools of the attack on the credibility of the electoral process with a view of the democratic values that we have seen. Against it, there is like number of tools. We're now actually running our NATO operational committee through the preventive and response options. For this, the work will not mature until June, but your nations, obviously being a NATO member states, will all receive the full list of what to do in order to prevent and to respond if they see any of these events happening. One thing that I would just mention on top is like what usually gives credibility of any governmental response, to just add to what Tony said, was actually having a cross-governmental bodies of experts, task forces that actually put both sides of the bench together, opposition and the governing party. For as long as you have joint bipartisan multipolar effort together with the same message, it automatically degrades any attacks that is possible. For as long as it's just the whatever is the party in power, their message will not be adequately heard. So I will stop at that and see if Mark and Tony actually have something more.
why do Russian narratives work very much with Serbs? And the reason they work is because of the historical narrative of Russia and Serbia being traditional allies. If you are factual, you will see that the EU's support to Serbia vastly outweighs the support of the Russians to Serbia. And yet, the Russians get far more credit for far less than the EU does. And I think this is an absolute case study in the power of narrative, historical narrative, and the fact that the Russians are effective at disinformation. But that disinformation would not work if it wasn't for the fact that Serbians have a predisposition to see the Russians in a good light because of the historical narrative. Thank you.
I just completely agree with what have been already said. The other point is that there was also a study while I was in the States working with the USS with the Serbian defense attaché. He was also trying to make a point that basically Americans have invested several times more than Russians did in Serbia, though there are some other arguments providing different aspects of this. But the point basically was made already, so I don't have anything to add to this.
Okay, thank you, Metodi. Since we are approaching to the end of our today's discussion, Monica, I'm not sure whether we have other participants willing to share their thoughts.
No, I don't see raised hands. Let me just go to the next page. No, unless I don't see something, but it would be shown here definitely. So yes, I don't know, maybe we can have some conclusion or wait for someone to
I raise hand.
You raise hand, okay.
Maybe as a wrap up of our discussion today, I will ask our distinguished speakers at the end, if they are asked to point out or to share with us one, from their perspective, the most important point or tip to have in mind about this information, having in mind the youth as our target group, what that would be. A kind of suggestion or recommendation.
That is such a difficult task. Sorry.
If it's possible, if anyone is ready, or we can.
Okay, I'll go first then. I will return to my point that you have to be an intelligent customer, and you have to make your friends intelligent customers. You need to judge yourself, be rigorous with yourself, check things. As a journalist, and I had a previous life as a journalist, you check your sources, you call up people, you cross-check, and only then do you draw conclusions. And then the final point is understand how important this is. The search for fair, factual knowledge is the bedrock of democracy. So don't be casual about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will say protect the data. Protect the data about yourself. These campaigns are only as successful as they're able to target each one of us, understanding our personalities, our fears, our stuff. If we protect the data about ourselves, then they won't have so much impact or influence over us. They will not know exactly what to target. So on top of what Mark said, I would say, like, carefully choose cookies and all those settings, and carefully choose which information about yourself are you releasing to the online companies, social medias and stuff, with the view that everything you put out there can be used against you, to influence you, to impact you, and impact your well. So I would say that, protect the data.
Well, I'll go to my point again. I think that everything that has already been said is very valid, but I would add that we need to make ourselves ready as a society to adapt to a new transformation that is ongoing, because though we might implement something that basically can work in the physical world, it might have totally different consequences in the digital world if it's not well adapted. I will just give you an example. Just recently, there was a published investigative story about how clickbait journalism is on a rise in North Macedonia, and how basically that is allegedly sponsored by legitimate business, which basically going deeper behind that legitimate business came out to be fake economic businesses, enterprises, allegedly related to some states pointing at Russia. So again, that being said, I would say that we need to, the whole society need to invest in this. This is a new process, and this is something that we need to start rethinking in a new way and adapting in this way. While we have traded our freedoms for security in the social contract, now we are trading our freedoms for services in the digital contract. So everybody when just have a gadget, we just click yes, 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 we accept to everything. So we need, as Mark said, we need to be intelligent about what we are accepting. And as Vlasta said, we need to be careful what we are accepting and to protect our data, because this data could be either subject of a social profiling that can be later on used, or identity theft that can be used in different purposes, etc., etc., etc. So the opportunities are looming large, and we need to be very careful. This is why I believe that though we need to have some rules and procedures how to respond, we need a structural changes, especially here in the Western Balkans. We need to change the way how we taught our youth, because I was just, let's say, share this with you and I will stop here. I was approached, why are we investing, let's say, questioned by one of our government officials, why are we investing in high school students' literacy? Because, well, they say they are still young. And I said, just because in 2 years they might vote and we might accept electoral voting by online voting, and we just because they can decide, and just because they might be influenced in just 2 years from now and make a decision right or wrong. So that being said, I would again go with investing in media and information literacy, especially if we are talking about the youth.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all of you, our dear and distinguished speakers, and thank you very much to all the participants. We did come to the end of our webinar, and the topic is such, as I said in the beginning, that we would be able to discuss about it for the next evening, not the next evening, but for until the end of this evening. I wouldn't keep you overnight, don't worry. So our project has the aim of what Professor Hadjianev said, of trying to educate people to be more careful about this information, and we continue it with 4 promotional videos that will be produced and that will be promoted on our social media channels. So both Ljubica and I wish you, thank you all again, and to wish you happy and safe holidays. Ljubica, do you have something to add?
And nothing to add except thank you once again to speakers and participants. It was a great discussion, and we are proceeding further with our promotional videos and more materials to come in the future. Thanks once again, and follow us. Bye.
Thank you for having us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.